A lot of what, good afternoon everyone. A lot of what I'm going to say here was already mentioned by Professor Mangahas, but I'll just go through and probably get something from that. I have my script and yeah, I was asked to come up with one. Tapping in Tattooing Identities, Tradition and Modernity in Contemporary Kalinga Society in North Luzon, Philippines is a compelling and critical contribution to the field of Philippine cultural anthropology. In this book, the tattoo becomes an organizing logic and episteme, or organizing knowledge. To first to map the geohistorical conditions of contemporary Kalinga society and culture. Second, to follow the personal narratives of its tattoo practitioners such as Wang Ud, and to trace the social life, to quote Adhon Apaduray, of the tattoo as visual cultural practices and markers of identity. Third, to resurface the local lived and aesthetic experiences, sensibilities, and local moral worldviews of the community, such as their spirit worlds and notions of community, notions of shame, courage, and so on. It critically highlights the process of experience and production than just focusing on the tattoo as a mere object or product. This is, I think, where I'm going to enter later on and further discuss. Fourth is to position the body, which in the words of cultural theorist Susan Bordeaux, is a contested site of text, identity, and culture. And finally, to re-engage the tropes, tradition, and modernity as crucial context of elucidating phenomena and practice of tattooing. The task to make the tattoo as an organizing logic is an impressive achievement. With its inviolable ethnographic material engagement and intertextual approach, the book has mapped the ramifications of Kalinga tattoo practices. The ethnographic practice of the author somehow resonates the art historical practice in terms of teasing out the knowledge from the subject of inquiry, detailed, incisive, positioned, and engaged. Art history, the field where I am now, has a long tradition in practice of engaging the ontological, or meaning the nature of being, of structure, and sociocultural narratives of the material as the rich source of cultural knowledge, change, critique, and as a signpost of historical context. It is interesting to note how the book reorganizes the ways of looking, feeling, touching, and sensing the tattoo as an artifact. First, the book narrates how the exteriority of the tattoo signifies the body of culture, that is appearance, design, visuality, physicality, form, and semiotics, and how its interiority emanates the embodiment of culture, sense feelings such as sense of belongingness and community, courage, pain, bravery, and even shame. Furthermore, the book outlines the transmittive, in other words, passing from one to another, the translative, how they translate it throughout time, and the performative potencies of Philippine culture in general and the Kalinga community in particular. I wish to divide my discussion into three. First, the condition of possibilities that this book informs us. Second, the condition of temporality that frames the ethnography of the Kalinga tattoo. As the book title utterly instructs us, this has something to do with the issues of tradition, modernity, and I would like to also include the notion of contemporary. I wish to discuss this portion of the book not as a critique, but to incite and encourage everyone to continue the debate about this hunting and uncanny notion of modernity and tradition. And finally, what the book means for us scholars of the art. Tapping Ink provides an intense ethnographic attention to its materials. It resurfaces issues of identity politics and production. It traces the tattoo's modes of circulation, reproduction, and dissemination, in other words, the political economy of tattoo. And it uncovers the affect and subjectivity brought by the process of tattooing, such as pain, shame, honor, identity production, and its situated cultural logic. With its thick ethnographic description, the book intersects with other materials and non-material practices like orality, mythologies, performances, festival engagement with spiritual and natural world, and the flow of the tattoo techniques and technologies, and even migration. Furthermore, the book accommodates, even though impressionistic, the other disciplinary fields such as history, aesthetics, visual culture, linguistics, politics, globalization, some extent gender, modernity studies, and performance studies. I find this attempt as a productive signification on how culture is epiphenomenal or kawin-kawin, situated to other related fields and ways of living. The book has its ways of looking for new forms of disciplinal solidarities as well as new languages to explain our ways of thinking, feeling, and seeing. Obviously, these are signs of disciplinal crossings or pagtawid, and these disciplinal crossings are forms of embeddedness or paglalapat and proxemic nearness or paglalapit of one field to other productive ideas. Second, and I'm kind of like uncomfortable discussing this theoretical part of the book, but I'm also ambivalent about this too, and this is more of like my own contemplation, not necessarily has something to do with the book. But since I'm doing theory to teaching art studies, art theory, so maybe we can also discuss this. Crucially, the book engages the dialogue between tradition and modernity. I would assume that because the book provides an emphasis on the literatures about modernity and tradition, I believe that these tropes serve as its theoretical compass, which orients us to further understand the contemporary communal, social, and individual imagination and identities of the Kalinga tattoo. To some extent, the tropes modernity and tradition become the symbiotics that the book inhabits to explain the social life of the tattoo. The dialogue on tradition and modernity, as the book itself reiterated as problematic, is a complex and complicated discourse, more so uncanny and haunting. The ideas about modernity and tradition have implicated the production of knowledge and ideological divide between the West and the East, the one and the other, and the North and the South. Crucially, it has historically informed the Euro-American imagination, value system, and its intellectual production as the legitimate form of knowledge for the longest time. My sense is that, as the book heavily relies on Western literature about theories on and of modernity, the book dilutes the modernity that it attempts to position. Say, for instance, trying to quote Western theories by Marshall Saline, Indigenization of Modernity, Eric Hobsbawm's Invented Tradition, and Arun Apodorai's celebratory globalization through his four global scapes, namely ethnoscape, technoscape, financescape, and idioscape. My reservation about this portion of the book is not because of its Westernness. Surely these theorists have their own theoretical merits and firm ethnographic foundations. My reservation relies on my curiosity in how these theoretical assertions can engage into a dialogue with other modernities which are uttered by other voices whose colonial or post-colonial and even neo-colonial or non-Western historical experiences share our experiences, or as what Olu Ugibe positions as our modernities. This apparently is absent in this book. I believe that this is crucial because engagement with other ideas about modernity, especially from the other voices, fuels a strategic alliance and sympathy among non-Western post-colonial nations. Furthermore, the engagement of reading and counter-reading on the discourse of modernity has the potency to extract and expose the constitutive powers that has enabled the hegemonic discourses of modernity and tradition to perpetuate our lived experiences, intellectual consciousness, and even our self-doubt about our very own historical conditions of modernity. It is necessary to extract and expose it so that we can strategically position ourselves and critique the pervading hegemony of Western knowledge into our classroom and everyday experiences. How is it even possible for the West to position its notion of modernity and tradition in its own time, its own pace, and its own convenience? Before, its definition was basically universal and absolute, and now it's more accommodating and render it more acceptable to non-Western world. What entitlement lies behind this change? Or say, why is modernity even a desirous language to explain the phenomena of our practices, lived experiences, cultures, and community? To appropriate cultural anthropologist Nestor Garcia Canclini in his narrative of the Latin American experience about modernity and tradition in this article, Modernity After Postmodernity, what is there to indigenize in modernity when the peripheries of the already peripheral neo-colonial and third-world metropoles have doubts whether modernity has arrived, or just incomplete, or belated, fragmented, or aborted? What does it mean to have significations of modernity in the processes and designs of the tattoo or any traditional form, and not a modernity in terms of social material conditions like infrastructural development, human rights of indigenous people, education, public service, state protection? And I'm also referring to people of, the indigenous people, especially Mindanao, the Lumans, so on and so forth. And this, to further problematize this idea of modernity and tradition, to follow Renato Rosaldo, and this is also the sentiment of cultural theorist Ray Chow about her curiosity and modernity, rurality, and rail stations, to what extent are notions of the modern based on innovations in technology? Is an asphalt road modern? If a traditional peddler is walking on a modern road, does the road become more traditional or peddler more modern? Both? Either or neither? Lastly, the term contemporary in contemporary Kalinga tattoo is intriguing. It is interesting how we can arrest the term and magnify its politics. I firmly believe that contemporary is no longer a naive, neutral, and objective to refer to a specific historical moment of contemporaneousness, present, and the now. The contemporary, as continuously unfolding historical moment, is already showing a sign of political and epistemic promise and project that is critical to and about modernity, tradition, and globalization. I firmly believe that this category deserves more scrutiny in relationship to modernity and tradition. Well, how do I wrap up this part? Well, this is a theoretical contemplation, my theoretical contemplation, and knowing that the role of the book is actually to recover the underrepresented in the presentation of anthropological and cultural knowledge, these theoretical steerings that I have their own time and phase to be further addressed. I've heard a while ago that Professor Iken is doing another book about tattoo, so I think it's a follow. So maybe it's going to be accommodated these inquiries about tradition and modernity further. I'm hoping that the author will continue her commitment to investigate the entanglements among modernity, tradition, and contemporary. This is my last part in this art studies part. Lastly, and perhaps why I'm here, is to contemplate on what this means to us, we the pedagogists of art, scholars of aesthetics and art theory, and trainers of future cultural workers. The book is a sign of re-articulating the cultural practice of indigenous people into a different trajectory and direction, while simultaneously creates a friction with the institutional, Western, white, patriarchal, canonical language of aesthetics and art theory. We have to admit that the whole system of art language is very canonical and Western. It is quite interesting to note that one of the foundational blocks of aesthetics and art theory and discourses have something to do with the tattoo practice of the non-Western world. Immanuel Kant, you guys are familiar with Immanuel Kant, right? I mean, a big name in the field of humanities, philosophy, and aesthetics, utilized Maori tattoo to shape the contour of Western notion of beauty. In his book, Critique of Aesthetic Judgment, he mentioned, much might be added to a building that would immediately please the eye, were it not intended to be a church. A figure might be beautified with all manner of flourishes and light, but regular lines, as is done by the New Zealanders with their tattooing, were we dealing with anything but a figure of a human being. And here is one whose rugged features might be softened and given a pleasing aspect. Only he has got to be a man, or is perhaps a warrior who has to have a warlike experience. So in other words, what just basically trying to say is that this indigenous tattoo is, in the Orientalist sense of Kant, is not beautiful. And therefore it's not art. And therefore it's, not beautiful. In other words, Kant positions a kind of beauty that is autonomous and universal, a beauty whose only purpose is to be beautiful, or say a purposiveness without a purpose, and a beauty that is pure and free from the constructs of society and community, and free from the content and context, function, and utility. These a priori and formalist conceptions of beauty have become the imperium, in other words, absolute knowledge and power, and emporium of knowledge about culture, art, and aesthetics in modern times. Kant's dismissal of the beauty of Maori tattoo has disenfranchised artistic representations and creative works of the non-Western world, such as weaving, tattooing, pottery, and so on and so forth. The book haunts the historical violence of the Western and Orientalist perspective about beauty. The book's ethnographic attention reclaims the tattoo's situated context and the specificity of the process of the creative experience. I need to reiterate the ethnographic attention of this book because, just as a trivia, when Kant thought of like Maori as not beautiful, well, Kant really never left his hometown in Germany and he never had a tattoo. So, the embeddedness of experience. I wish to call the gesture of the book to resurface the local artistic practices of Kalinga society as a form of ethno-aesthetics. I did not coin the term, and there's already an ongoing debate about ethno-aesthetics historical situatedness of aesthetic experience and processes of making art and expressions. To resituate aesthetics as historical and culture specific is to defamiliarize ourselves with the canons of art and our very own aesthetic education. The act of defamiliarization does not, to treat something new, right, does not only produce a crisis to our senses, but opens up a new possibility of experiencing art and accommodating terms and categories from the other cultures. The vernacular and aesthetic terms, as fleshed out from the Kalinga experience, provide an opportunity to further know our knowledge, our culture rather. The tattoo experience of sikap, or pain, no? Sikap is the vernacular term for pain in Kalinga society, for instance, informs us of the shared experiences and conception about individual bodies as subject to communal identity formation. Terms such as wayu, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Ma'am Ike, wayu or beautiful, wayu, lagwingon, ugly, arakus for decoration or art, bagas as magical and potency, katataku, personhood, kawawhain, great shame. Those are like aesthetic experiences that or feelings that you might probably want to consider. Crucially, these vernacular terms spark a tension with the dominant narrative of art and aesthetic as it asserts itself as an equally valid forms of aesthetic experience and sensing. The book is generous to enough to expand our vocabulary on art and aesthetics. These are not just collections of vernacular categories, but are portals to explore other modes of experiencing and our entry to the local moral worldviews of a specific culture, in this case, the contemporary Kalinga society. The discussion on iconographic forms and designs with its corresponding meanings further contextualizes the relationship of the Kalinga community to itself, nature, or environment, to other people, or the spirit world. Example would be, Sinhoto Chipanya, bundle of rice means sign of fertility and growth. Gayaman or centipedes as a symbol of fortune and protection. So, meron siyang meaning at malalim ito para sa kanila. No? The book's attention to local knowledge is a form of critical intimation between art and the everyday, art and society, and artists and history. It is a proof that meanings of art and Kalinga cultural practices are transforming and transformative. I'm encouraging our current and future cultural workers, scholars, advocates, and researchers to engage the locale and position their context both politically and culturally, just like what this well-written book did. The book's attempt to map the tattoo on the body of its wearers also maps the palpable and changing body politics of our local and national culture. Thank you.